What if the most protected nuclear material on Earth wasn't safe at all? What if decades of tunnels, mountains, and secrecy meant nothing the moment America decided to act? Before we go further, hit subscribe and tap that notification bell right now, because this story is still moving and you don't want to miss the next chapter. And if this kind of deep, honest breakdown is what you came here for, smash that like button. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who deserve the real picture, not the watered-down version. Now let's talk about Fordow. For most people watching this, that name means nothing. But for Iran's leadership, it was everything. Fordow was not just a facility, it was a promise that no matter what the world threw at Iran, its nuclear program would survive. It was built to survive an airstrike. It was built to survive a war. It was built, more than anything, to survive American power. Here's why. Back in the mid-2000s, Iran's nuclear engineers made a decision that would shape the next 20 years of Middle East tension. They decided that if they were going to keep enriching uranium, they could not do it out in the open. Natanz, their main enrichment site, was already known to the world. It had already been targeted once by a computer virus that tore through its centrifuges and set the program back years. So Iran learned a hard lesson. If you build in the open, you get hit. If you build where no one can reach you, maybe you survive. That is how Fordow was born. Dug deep into a mountain near the holy city of Qom, the facility was placed under roughly 80 to 90 meters of solid rock. Not a basement, not a bunker. A literal mountain hollowed out and reinforced, built specifically to withstand the kind of bombs that existed at the time. Iran believed, and had good reason to believe, that nothing in the American or Israeli arsenal could reach that deep and still do meaningful damage. For years, that belief held. Fordow sat there quietly, enriching uranium closer and closer to weapons-grade purity, protected not by soldiers or air defense systems, but by pure geology. Think about that for a moment. Iran wasn't hiding its nuclear program behind stealth, it was hiding it behind stone. An entire mountain became the shield. And for over a decade, that shield worked. International inspectors knew the site existed. Satellites could see the entrance. Everyone knew Fordow was there, but knowing where something is and being able to destroy it are two very different problems. Iran had solved the first one. They had built a location impossible to hide. And they gambled that the second problem, actually destroying it, was impossible too. There is something almost poetic about the choice Iran made here. Instead of pouring resources into stealth technology or advanced air defenses that could intercept incoming bombers, Iran chose the oldest form of protection humans have ever used: rock, mass, depth. It's the same logic that built castles on cliffs and cities behind mountain passes thousands of years ago. The idea that if you simply put enough solid material between yourself and your enemy, no weapon can reach you. For centuries, that logic worked, and for a while in the modern nuclear age, it seemed to work again. That gamble is what makes this story so important. Because in June of 2025, that gamble was tested, and the answer was not what Iran expected. Let's rewind slightly to set the stage. Tensions between Israel and Iran had been building for years, but they exploded into direct open warfare in the middle of June. This was not a slow buildup. This was a sudden, violent escalation that caught much of the world off guard. Cities that had known relative calm for years were suddenly under missile fire. Air raid sirens became a nightly reality in parts of Israel, and across Iran, explosions at military facilities became a near-daily occurrence as Israeli jets pressed their advantage in the skies, having already crippled much of Iran's air defense network in the campaign's opening hours. But Israel had a problem. Its bombs, powerful as they were, could not reach deep enough into Fordow's mountain to destroy the enrichment halls buried inside. Israel could hit the power lines. It could hit the entrances. It could make life difficult for the engineers working inside. But the heart of the facility, the actual enrichment chambers, sat beyond the reach of anything in the Israeli arsenal. Fordow's mountain was still doing its job. Only one country on Earth had a weapon built specifically to solve this exact problem: the United States. For years, the American military had been developing and refining a weapon called the Massive Ordnance Penetrator, known by its official name, the GBU-57. This is not a typical bomb. It is a 30,000-pound bunker-piercing weapon designed from the ground up to punch through layers of reinforced rock and concrete before detonating deep underground. It had been tested. It had been talked about publicly for years as the one weapon capable of reaching a target like Fordow. Iran knew this weapon existed. Iran knew, in theory, what it could do. But there is a difference between knowing a threat exists on paper and watching it actually arrive over your mountain in the middle of the night. On the night of June 21st into June 22nd, that difference became very real. In the early hours of the morning, Iranian time, American B-2 stealth bombers, aircraft specifically designed to slip through enemy radar undetected, took off on a mission that would be remembered for years. These aircraft flew an extraordinarily long route, reportedly covering thousands of miles, refueling midair multiple times, all while maintaining total radio silence and stealth posture. It was one of the longest and most complex bomber missions in recent American military history, and Iran, despite months of tension, apparently had no idea it was coming until the bombs were already falling. Multiple B-2s, each carrying these massive bunker buster bombs, flew directly toward Fordow. At the same time, American submarines positioned in nearby waters launched a wave of Tomahawk cruise missiles toward two other critical sites, the Natanz enrichment facility and the Isfahan nuclear complex, where Iran converted and stored uranium material. This was not a symbolic strike. This was not a warning shot fired to make a political point. This was a coordinated three-site assault on the physical infrastructure of Iran's nuclear program, executed in the span of about 25 minutes. At Fordow, the B-2 bombers dropped a dozen or more of these massive penetrator bombs directly onto the mountain above the enrichment halls. For the first time in history, this weapon was used in actual combat. Not a test range, not a demonstration. A live strike on a live nuclear facility that the world had assumed was untouchable. Engineers who had designed this bomb for years, running simulations and calculations about penetration depth, were finally seeing their work tested against the exact kind of target it was built for. At Natanz, the site already weakened by Israeli strikes days earlier, more damage followed, targeting what remained of its power systems and underground cascade halls. At Isfahan, the Tomahawks tore into the facility where much of Iran's uranium conversion and, according to some reports, part of its stockpile of enriched material was believed to be stored. Let that sink in. In under half an hour, the United States targeted the three most important pillars of Iran's nuclear infrastructure simultaneously. Not one at a time, not with weeks of buildup and warning, all at once, in the dark, using a weapon Iran had never seen used in war before. Every American aircraft involved in the mission reportedly returned home safely, without a single loss, a detail that only added to the shock felt across Tehran in the hours that followed. Right around now would be a great time to hit that thumbs up if you're finding this useful. If you're new here, this is exactly the kind of layered, honest analysis we dig into on this channel, so consider joining us by subscribing. It really does make a difference in helping this channel grow and keep bringing you breakdowns like this one. Now let's talk about what happened next, because the reaction to this strike tells you almost as much as the strike itself. Within hours, American officials, including the president himself, declared the operation an overwhelming success. The language used was dramatic. Officials claimed the sites had suffered extremely severe damage, some going as far as to say Natanz had been effectively destroyed and that Iran's nuclear timeline had been pushed back by years, not months. It was framed, publicly, as one of the most decisive military operations of the era, a demonstration that American power could reach targets once considered completely untouchable. Iran naturally told a very different story. Iranian state media initially downplayed the damage, describing it as limited and superficial. Some Iranian officials even suggested that authorities had anticipated the strike and had already moved sensitive material out of the facilities before the bombs ever fell. It's a claim worth sitting with for a moment, because if true, it means Iran may have had at least some warning that an attack was imminent and used that window to protect its most valuable asset, the enriched uranium itself, by relocating it elsewhere. If that happened, then the story of this strike becomes less about erasing Iran's nuclear program and more about a much longer, much murkier hunt for where that material actually ended up. This is where things get genuinely uncertain, and where you should be skeptical of anyone claiming to have the full picture with total confidence. In the days and weeks after the strike, independent analysts pored over satellite imagery, trying to determine the real extent of the damage. Some assessments described massive craters directly above the underground halls at both Fordow and Natanz, evidence of powerful, precise strikes. Others pointed to the fact that the deepest chambers, the actual centrifuge halls buried far below the surface, were much harder to assess from space alone. You can see a crater. You cannot always see what happened 3 stories beneath it. Analysts who study these sites for a living have pointed out something important. Satellite images can show entrance points sealed shut, ventilation shafts collapsed, and power infrastructure destroyed. What they cannot easily show is whether the centrifuge cascades themselves, the delicate, precisely calibrated machines that actually spin uranium into higher purity, were shattered by the shockwave of the blast, or whether they somehow survived deep inside a structure that was never designed to be opened up and inspected from the outside after an attack like this. Adding to the confusion, a leaked early intelligence assessment reportedly circulated within the American defense community suggesting the damage, while real, may not have been as complete as officials publicly claimed. This assessment reportedly estimated the setback to Iran's program at closer to a few months rather than years. That assessment was quickly disputed by senior officials, who stood by the stronger claims of near-total destruction. Meanwhile, the International Atomic Energy Agency, the global nuclear watchdog responsible for monitoring these exact facilities, described the damage at all three sites as enormous, though its inspectors faced serious difficulty getting a clear, on-the-ground view of the underground chambers in the aftermath. So what do we actually know? We know the strike happened. We know it was one of the most significant military operations against a nuclear program in modern history. We know real, heavy damage was done to the surface infrastructure, the power systems, the tunnel entrances, and likely significant portions of the underground halls as well. What we don't know, and may not know for a long time, is the exact fate of Iran's stockpile of highly enriched uranium. Was it destroyed in the strikes? Was it moved beforehand to a secret location Iran has not disclosed? That single question, more than any crater or satellite photo, is the one that will define whether this strike truly changed Iran's nuclear trajectory or simply delayed it. Iran did not sit quietly after the attack. The following day, Iranian forces launched a retaliatory missile strike against Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, one of the largest American military installations in the region. It was a significant response, a clear message that Iran was not going to absorb this blow without pushing back. But notably, the strike caused limited damage, and many analysts believe Iran deliberately calibrated its response to avoid triggering a full-scale regional war while still being able to tell its own people that it had struck back. Reports suggest Iran may have even given advance warning through diplomatic channels before this specific retaliation, a move that would suggest Tehran was looking for a way to save face without dragging the entire region into a prolonged war it likely could not win. Shortly after, a ceasefire was announced, bringing the most intense phase of direct fighting to a pause, even as both sides continued to accuse each other of violations in the days that followed. Now here's the part of this story that deserves real attention, because it goes far beyond just bombs and buildings. For decades, Iran's nuclear ambitions were treated by many in the West as something distant, something that would eventually be resolved through negotiations, sanctions, and diplomatic pressure. There were agreements, there were inspections, there were years of back and forth about enrichment percentages and stockpile limits. Through all of that, Iran steadily built up capability, expanding its centrifuge network, increasing enrichment levels, and burying its most sensitive work deeper and deeper underground, where diplomacy and inspections had limited reach. What the June strikes demonstrated was a fundamental shift in approach. Rather than relying purely on sanctions or slow diplomatic pressure, the United States, alongside Israel, chose direct military action against the physical heart of the program. This was not a covert cyber attack like the one that hit Natanz years earlier. This was not a quiet assassination of a scientist in the night. This was an open, acknowledged conventional military strike using some of the most powerful non-nuclear weapons in the American arsenal, deployed against facilities the world had largely assumed were beyond reach. Think about what that means for every other country watching. For years, the strategy of burying critical infrastructure deep underground was considered close to bulletproof. Mountains don't move, rock doesn't negotiate. If you dig deep enough, conventional wisdom said, you're safe from anything short of a nuclear weapon yourself. Fordow was the ultimate test of that theory. It was arguably the most heavily protected non-nuclear facility on the planet, and a single coordinated strike using a purpose-built weapon flown by stealth aircraft proved that even a mountain has a limit. That is the real headline here, far beyond the immediate damage assessments. The rules that governments believe protected their most sensitive programs just got rewritten in real time. If Fordow could be reached, then very few facilities anywhere in the world can claim true, permanent safety through depth and concealment alone. North Korea's bombed underground test sites, Russia's hardened command bunkers, and any future programs some other nation might try to bury deep underground, all of them now exist in a world where the theoretical has become proven fact. The mountain lost. We're deep into this breakdown now, and I want to pause and ask you something. If this kind of grounded, no-hype analysis is something you value, let me know by dropping a comment, telling me what you think Iran's next move will be. Your comments genuinely shape what we cover next, so don't be shy. And while you're there, tap that share button and send this to one person who still thinks this story is as simple as the headlines made it sound. It isn't. Let's talk about what this means for Iran internally, because a strike like this does not just damage buildings. It damages belief. For years, Iran's government has told its own people a very specific story. That story goes something like this. Despite crushing sanctions, despite international isolation, despite constant threats from the West, Iran has still managed to build a nuclear program that makes the country untouchable. It's a story of resilience, of standing tall against powerful enemies, of proving that Iran cannot simply be pushed around. That narrative has been central to how the regime justifies decades of economic hardship to its own population. Sanctions hurt, prices rise, opportunities shrink. But the government's answer has always been, Look what we've built despite it all. Look at what we've achieved that no one thought possible. A strike like this cuts directly against that story. When American bombers can fly undetected through your airspace, hit your most protected facility, and return home without a single aircraft lost, it becomes very hard to maintain the narrative of untouchability. Ordinary Iranians, already dealing with inflation, unemployment, and years of economic pressure, are now watching their government's signature achievement come under direct, devastating attack, with conflicting claims about how bad the damage really is. This creates a dangerous position for Iran's leadership. If they admit the damage was severe, they risk looking weak and exposed at a moment when public trust is already fragile. If they insist the damage was minor, and evidence later proves otherwise, they risk looking dishonest, manipulating their own citizens to save face. Either path carries real political risk, and regimes that feel cornered on both the international stage and the domestic stage tend to make decisions driven more by pride than by careful strategy. That is precisely the kind of situation that makes the coming months so unpredictable. There's also a quieter, slower kind of damage happening here, one that doesn't show up in satellite images at all. It's the erosion of confidence among Iran's own scientists and engineers, the people who spent years of their lives building and maintaining this program. Many of them worked under constant threat of assassination, watched colleagues killed in targeted attacks over the years, and continued regardless, believing they were building something permanent, something that would outlast any external pressure. Watching that work potentially reduced to rubble in 25 minutes is not just a strategic setback. It is a deeply personal one for the people who dedicated their careers to it. There's also a broader regional dimension worth understanding. Gulf nations like Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates have spent years watching Iran's nuclear progress with deep unease. A nuclear-capable Iran, even one that stops short of an actual weapon, radically changes the balance of power across the entire region. For these countries, a strike that meaningfully sets back Iran's program, even temporarily, is viewed as a form of reassurance, even if publicly they express concern about the risk of a wider war breaking out on their doorstep. They don't want missiles flying near their oil infrastructure or shipping lanes through the Strait of Hormuz getting disrupted. But privately, many of these governments have quietly welcomed any action that slows Iran's nuclear trajectory. Meanwhile, countries like Russia and China, both of which maintain economic and strategic ties with Iran, are watching this unfold as a test of how far American military power is willing to go to enforce its red lines. Neither country intervened militarily to protect Iran's nuclear sites, and that silence speaks volumes. It suggests that even Iran's closest strategic partners were unwilling to risk direct confrontation with the United States over this specific issue. That leaves Iran in a strategically isolated position, publicly defiant, but without the kind of hard military backup that could have changed the outcome of that night in June. This isolation matters more than it might seem at first glance. Throughout the conflict, Iran repeatedly invoked its partnerships with Russia and China as evidence that it was not truly alone on the world stage. But when the moment of maximum pressure arrived, when American bombers were actually in the air heading toward Iranian territory, neither ally moved to intervene. That gap between rhetoric and reality is something Iran's leadership will have to reckon with as they plan their next steps. And it's something every country that has ever counted on Moscow or Beijing for protection should probably be paying close attention to as well. So, where does this actually leave Iran's nuclear program going forward? This is the question that matters most, and honestly, nobody outside a small circle of intelligence officials knows the full answer yet. If the strikes truly destroyed the core enrichment infrastructure at all three sites, and if the stockpile of highly enriched uranium was destroyed or rendered unusable in the process, then Iran's path to a nuclear weapon has been meaningfully set back, potentially by years. Rebuilding facilities like Fordow is not something that happens quickly. It requires specialized equipment, rare materials, skilled engineers, an enormous investment, much of it now harder to obtain given ongoing sanctions and heightened international scrutiny. Centrifuges of the kind used in advanced enrichment cascades take years to manufacture and calibrate correctly. And many of the components require materials and technology that are tightly restricted under international sanctions, regimes specifically designed to prevent exactly this kind of rebuilding effort. But if Iran successfully moved its enriched uranium stockpile before the strikes, as some Iranian officials have claimed, then the picture looks very different. In that scenario, the physical enrichment facilities may be damaged or destroyed, but the material itself, the hardest and most time-consuming part of the entire process to produce, could still exist somewhere, hidden, waiting. Rebuilding centrifuges is difficult but achievable over time. Replacing enriched uranium that already exists is a very different problem than starting from scratch. This is why so much of the ongoing intelligence effort in the aftermath of the strikes has reportedly focused not just on assessing the damage to buildings, but on trying to locate where that material might be now. This uncertainty is exactly why this story is far from over. A single night of airstrikes, however dramatic, however historic, does not settle a conflict that has been building for decades. It resets the clock, it changes the terms, but it does not end the story. What we do know for certain is this. The strike on Fordow represents one of the most significant uses of American military power against a nuclear program in the modern era. It proved that a weapon built specifically to reach the unreachable actually worked when it mattered most. It demonstrated that the United States was willing to cross a threshold that many analysts believed it would avoid for years: direct kinetic action against active IAEA-monitored nuclear facilities. And it sent a message, not just to Iran, but to every government around the world quietly working on sensitive programs buried deep underground, that depth and secrecy are no longer the guarantee of safety they once were. For Iran, the coming months will be defined by hard, uncomfortable choices. Rebuild in secret and risk another strike. Rebuild openly and invite international condemnation. Or shift strategy entirely, perhaps returning to the negotiating table from a position that is, for the first time in years, genuinely weaker than before. None of these paths are easy. None of them come without significant cost to a government already struggling to maintain the trust of its own people. And for the rest of the world, this moment serves as a stark reminder of how quickly decades of careful, patient strategy can be upended in the span of 25 minutes. Iran spent close to 20 years building a fortress designed to be untouchable. It took a single, coordinated night to prove that no fortress, no matter how deep, is truly beyond reach anymore. That is the real story behind the headlines. Not just a bombing run, not just a political statement, but a fundamental shift in what safety actually means for a nuclear program in the modern world. The mountain that was supposed to protect Iran's uranium for a generation now sits cratered and compromised, its secrets partially exposed to a world that is still trying to figure out exactly what remains inside. The lights haven't gone out on this story yet. If anything, they've just been switched on, and everyone, from Tehran to Washington to every capital watching nervously in between, is now waiting to see what happens next. Before you go, I want to hear from you directly. Do you think Iran's nuclear program has been genuinely set back for years? Or do you think this is a temporary setback that will be rebuilt within a couple of years? Drop your honest take in the comments below. I read every single one. And if this breakdown helped you actually understand what happened here instead of just skimming a headline, that is exactly why this channel exists. Stick around, subscribe if you haven't already, and I will see you in the next one, where we keep digging into the stories that actually matter.